This video, we're going to talk about some of the dead online games from back in the day, because while there's a few legendary titles that are still very much alive and pulling massive numbers, while there's also a mountain of games that have slowly shut down over the years, or their player bases are so low that they're practically ghost towns by now. So let's go ahead and rank them all on a tier list, with S tier being this game is the most deserving of a second chance, all the way down to F tier being, I don't think people miss it that much. And what better place to start than the one game that practically defined online childhood gaming for so many people, ToonTown Online. I think everybody remembers seeing those commercials on Disney Channel from back in the day with the people that were dressed up like the cogs and you just wanted to go home after school just to get on ToonTown and see what all the fuzz was all about. This game sold the idea that it was made specifically for kids pretty well, I would say, because your character, instead of having a health meter, you had a laugh meter. The way you fought against the evil cogs that went to businessify ToonTown and make it all boring was using slapstick comedy, and even the currency that was in the game was literally jelly beans, so everything was definitely kid-oriented for sure. My favorite part was the fact that when you lost a battle against the cogs and you got sent back to the town square, Disney was like, there's no dying in this game, you know, that's too violent for little kids, let's give the characters clinical depression instead. Let them just drag their feet around the town square and prepare for life as an adult. I remember that back in the day, my parents didn't believe in online payments or subscriptions, so I couldn't get the full ToonTown experience. I could only really go as far as the free trial let me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys were like that too, but there was just something magical about the online games from the early 2000s, where it felt like there was a lot more freedom to just exist in the world versus what we have now. For example, in ToonTown, you could fight the cogs if you wanted to, you could level up your character the way the game intended, but it wasn't necessarily just about the battles, you know, because there was so much more to do in the game, and there was no real wrong way to play it. Like, you had minigames that you could play on the trolley, you could go fishing and talk with other toons in the town square, you could also just buy furniture and customize your own home, or maybe you just want to explore the map with no real goal in mind. Like, a lot of what made ToonTown so special back in the day is that you could choose how you wanted to have fun in the game, versus nowadays where the game kind of just steers you in a certain direction of what they think fun is. I don't know, maybe it's the fact that we were all kids back in the day and our imagination was running wild, but it's like games like ToonTown make you take a step back and realize how much the gaming landscape has changed over the years. With everything about the game being hyper-polished and maximized for player retention, you got the pressures of daily logins, the battle passes, the item shops. You know, sometimes it can just be a little too much. And if you want to know what happened to ToonTown though, Disney shut the game down back in 2013 after 10 years of being online, but you can still play it in one of the two main revival servers, ToonTown Rewritten, which is a more faithful version of the original, and ToonTown Corporate Clash, which is the one that they've been basically updating over the years with brand new bosses, new gags, new areas, and everything. So in terms of where we want to put ToonTown on the tier list, I think this is a definite S tier because of the amount of nostalgic value that the game has. Next up, we gotta talk about FusionFall though, which is the Cartoon Network MMORPG from 2009 that had the most epic crossover of characters anybody had ever seen up to that point. They took all of your Saturday morning cartoons from Samurai Jack, Kids Next Door, Ed, and Eddy, and you were going right there on an adventure with them to save the world, so a pretty big contrast to like the tame elements that you saw in ToonTown. I remember seeing the art style and thinking that some of the characters looked weird as heck, like the Powerpuff Girls suddenly had hands and fingers instead of nubs, Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory was suddenly regular size instead of short, but just the fact that you could see them all working together there was kind of like seeing the Avengers movie for the first time. In terms of gameplay though, FusionFall kind of just operated like most MMORPGs at the time. You know, you had your fetch quests, your kill quests, your collect X amount of this quest, so a very familiar formula for people to understand that sometimes felt a little too repetitive, to be honest, but some of the platforming puzzles and fighting the fusion versions of the characters to collect the nanos really made up for it in my opinion. The nanos in FusionFall were basically like little followers with abilities that could help you in combat, so you had to collect them, you had to level them up, and then you can customize your character's loadout alongside with the nanos to have some pretty unique playstyles. But I'm not gonna lie to you though, FusionFall was always more about the crossover itself versus the actual gameplay. Like, you can still play FusionFall using private servers even though the official server shut down in 2013, and some of the gameplay mechanics definitely feel like they just aged poorly with time. The gameplay's lore of you being a kid from the past that got sent to the future to help the Cartoon Network characters on their quest was probably the biggest charm that the game had. And while FusionFall wasn't exactly perfect by any means, it's a game that a lot of people still have plenty of nostalgia for, and if I had to put it anywhere on the tier list, I think that FusionFall deserves a solid A tier. Alright, so next up on the list we have Club Penguin, the OG virtual hangout spot where you just went out to live your best life as a penguin. Like, I think this would have been the perfect game to play during the lockdowns because it was just aimless fun and mini-games. What people loved so much about Club Penguin was the fact that you didn't have to try hard any part of it. Like, you could just go in and chat with a couple of other penguins, maybe you would run into a group of actual criminals discussing their plans on the dance floor because that was a thing that would really happen in Club Penguin specifically for some reason. And once you're accidentally included on an FBI watch list, and then you can go ahead and play one of the many mini-games inside of Club Penguin. Just like with a lot of early games from back in the day, it was more about the social aspect of being there versus trying to grind out and earn new gear or win the game or something. So it was really the perfect game to get into when you were just browsing the internet and you just wanted to go hang out with people for a little while, kind of like a message board with mini-games. And because you could run into just about any kind of person in Club Penguin, sometimes you would hear the absolute wildest stuff being said back there. Like sometimes people from 4chan would raid the server, and then you would see penguins dressed in white cloaks standing around to form a certain symbol, but heck, that was just a regular day at Club Penguin, I suppose. Like, you can really tell why after Disney bought it and just milked the brand for everything that it was worth, they just really let the game die out completely in 2017. And while there have been a few revival projects here and there that have brought Club Penguin back and you can still play them to this day, well, they just don't really have the same spark as the original Club Penguin. So for the OG Club Penguin, I really think I'm gonna rank it in A tier. Next up on the list, we have Sherwood Dungeon, which is one of the oldest MMORPG games that's still officially alive to this day. Even though during peak times you'll probably run into like maybe 40 players max, so technically speaking the game is a ghost town. But at one point Sherwood Dungeon was pulling in millions of players and winning actual game awards because the best part about Sherwood Dungeon is that you didn't need anything fancy to be able to run it. This was a browser-based MMO game where you went to the website, you picked out your username to log in, and that's it, you're already in the game. Whatever happened after that was entirely up to you, and I mean that in the most literal way possible because honestly, the game didn't offer much in terms of structure or direction. The gameplay loop in Sherwood Dungeon was pretty much kill some mobs, pick up some loot, level up to learn some new combat moves, and then just rinse repeat. The game just was not complicated in any sort of way, like you didn't have any special professions or skill trees or anything to do other than to just dive into the dungeon to open some treasure chests that never really gave you anything useful. Like, it wasn't until much later into the game's lifespan that they added an actual story with a quest line to go on and kill a dragon, so just like with Club Penguin, the main selling point for Sherwood Dungeon was the community that was behind it. Like, it was more of a hangout spot where you could go and meet people, make friends, maybe join a clan so that way you can get involved in these huge PvP wars that happened back in the day. Sherwood Dungeon was just a very simple game, and that's why a lot of people liked it. You know, it was basically a chat room where you could also roleplay as a medieval knight, but maybe it was just a little too simple, and that's why the game really didn't age well. For me specifically, Sherwood Dungeon was the palate cleanser. Whenever I needed a break from my other more successful medieval online games like RuneScape for example, Sherwood Dungeon is a place I would usually log into to just mess around for it, to sort of just like remind myself how good RuneScape really was. But I've played the game on stream a couple of times before, and you could realistically do everything that the game has to offer in like maybe 3 hours or less. So in terms of where we're going to put Sherwood Dungeon on the tier list, I honestly think that if this game were to disappear tomorrow, maybe like 40 people would miss it for a day before they moved on to go play something else. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it on the F tier here, even if my memories of the game are all good ones. This next one is probably going to give you a major blast from the past because it's not really a single game in itself, but an entire website. Like, one of the things I missed the most about the early internet was back when every single cartoon channel had their own site that was just filled with a bunch of different browser games. You had the Disney Channel website, you had Nickelodeon with some SpongeBob and Avatar games, but undisputedly, Cartoon Network had the best game selection out there. They were like these tiny little masterpieces that didn't need to be over the top, they didn't need to have a constant internet connection or anything. They were just bite-sized pieces of fun that you either played at school during computer lab or back home. And the best part was that you could find just about any genre of game inside the Cartoon Network library. Like, some of my personal favorites, for example, was Teen Titans Battle Blitz, which is a typical 2D fighting game. There was Kids Next Door Operation Startup, which was an adventure game where you played as every Kids Next Door operative, completing missions, defeating bosses, and there were just so many different Ed, Edd n Eddy games to play from too. A lot of them were super fun, like you had the bumper carts one, there was a food fight one, and I remember that was the first time they ever showed Double D without his hat, and everybody was just going crazy for that. But the cool thing about it was that Cartoon Network was never really trying to sell you anything with these games. Maybe some brand recognition here and there or something, but the fact that you had such a massive catalog of free-to-play games that were all about your favorite cartoon characters made it feel like they were just an extension of the TV shows. I don't know, back when I was a kid, I felt like I could just connect to these characters better, so you can imagine what a real tragedy it was when Adobe Shockwave and Flash were discontinued, and it just killed killed so many of these websites literally overnight. Like, all of these games were instantly rendered unplayable, and eventually the Cartoon Network Games website shut down a few years ago as well, which was honestly pretty depressing when I wanted to look it up again as an adult. But in terms of where we're gonna put the Cartoon Network library on the tier list, I think a solid C tier here is pretty deserving. Okay, so next up on the list, we can talk about Gaia Online, and the best way to honestly describe Gaia is that it was more of a social network that had an entire ecosystem of games for your character than anything else. The art style on the avatars was very anime inspired, and what you would do is that you played a bunch of different mini games inside of Gaia Online to collect these coins that you could then spend in the marketplace to get more customizable gear to show off your personality in the game. There was even an entire MMORPG inside of Gaia Online that you could play too, but most people back then just used the website as a forum to talk with other people, and if you made any friends there, you could hang out virtually inside of the town square, for example. And Gaia Online really wanted you to get involved in the conversations because on their websites, one of the best ways to get coins was actually participating in the forums, so they were literally bribing people to talk to strangers on the internet. But what really made Gaia Online feel so special and so different from a social media like MySpace at the time, for example, is that apart from the character customization and the forums, it was the little details that made the community feel much more alive. Like, for example, they had this thing called Gaia Cinemas, and it was basically a virtual movie theater that worked just like a real one with showtimes and everything. So that and the town square and the MMORPG inside of Gaia Online, it was all those little features that really gave a breath of life to the website. It made it feel much more alive than what we have in social media these days. So if you were ever on Gaia Online before, please leave a comment, because it was a game that had millions of users, and yet at the same time I feel like it was such a small and obscure corner of the internet that nobody ever talks about it. And of course, if I had to put Gaia Online anywhere on the tier list, I think I'm gonna put it at a D tier, because I don't really think that many people would miss it if it just disappeared overnight. And next up, we're gonna talk about an online game that started out all the way back in the Dreamcast, that later made its way into the GameCube, and then finally made its way over to the PC, which is Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2. Now, this game was an absolute masterpiece for anybody who loved online RPG games. Like, it was one of the only 3 games ever released on the GameCube that you could actually play online with and connect using a separate LAN adapter that you could buy and connect it to the bottom of your console. So if you've ever seen that picture of that one massive GameCube controller that has the keyboard in the middle, yeah, that was made specifically for games like Phantasy Star Online. Like, this one is probably my favorite game of all time. Like, I remember pretending to be sick so I could skip school just to play this bad boy for hours on end. I remember that you had to pay a subscription fee just to be able to play online, and even though I mentioned earlier that my parents didn't believe in paying for online services back in the day, I actually did manage to play PSO online, because I remember that my cousin would give me like a cracked memory card or something that let me connect to the servers for free. But yeah, the combat in PSO was extremely simple, since you just used the same 3-string combo over and over again. You had like 12 different classes to choose from, whether you want to be a human, a robot, or an elf, a sword user, gun user, magic user. It was a very grindy experience, but for some reason it was just super addictive, man. Like, you could just easily put hundreds of hours into this game, and the way that the game worked is that you basically had your main hub, that was the space station, where you could go down to the planet and explore the dungeon by defeating enemies, collecting loot, leveling up your character, and then just fighting the dungeon boss that's at the end of the level. But Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2 still has a dedicated following to this day that just prefers to play this version of the game versus the sequel that's already been out for a very long time now, and it's much more established as an MMORPG. And even after the official PC servers shut down all the way back in 2008, they still have the game running via private servers, so in terms of where to put PSO on the tier list, this is a very biased take, but it's fine because it's my tier list, but this is a very well-deserved S tier, no questions asked. And next up is the game that was a big part of a lot of people's childhoods growing up, and it's called Pirates of the Caribbean Online. That's the 3rd Disney-owned online game on this list. They were just on fire with this sort of stuff back in the day, and you had sailing to explore different islands, you had naval battles against enemy ships, ground battles, everything you could expect from an online multiplayer pirate game. It wasn't the perfect game by any means, it was kind of clunky, awkward looking, and the combat was like okay, but it had its charm. And now I gotta be honest, this is the one game I didn't get the chance to play growing up. I played the fan revival called The Legend of Pirates Online, and it was pretty cool to dive in and see why the game left such an impact with so many people when it was around. You had characters from the movie playing their part in the story, you had your quest lines to follow, you could customize your character however you wanted, and just the fact that you could team up with other players online to form crews and sail together was just honestly the best thing. Like, if you grew up watching the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, this was the perfect game to get into. There's not that many pirate MMO games out there that have managed to do it as well as Pirates of the Caribbean Online did. Even a game like Skull and Bones that came out in early 2024, they still didn't know how to give the players what they wanted in terms of like living your life life out there as a pirate. But Pirates of the Caribbean Online launched all the way back in 2007, and it was around for about 6 years before Disney decided to pull the plug. And obviously, if you look at the graphics and you see how the game plays, I really don't think it would stand a chance in today's market, but as a treat of nostalgia for the people who grew up playing the game, I think the Pirates of the Caribbean Online game still has a solid spot on the B tier on this list. And yeah guys, that's the entire tier list. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's any childhood game that made an impact on your life. And that's it guys. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.